Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today we're back chatting with Nick from the Altitude Centre. Hello Nick.
Hi Keith, how are we? Hello everyone.
Very well, thank you. Now obviously we've done a relaunch of the podcast and we're hopefully now it's not just my voice that's going to be on the podcast. We'll have hopefully somebody with me every week from now on, which is super exciting. And obviously we've done some podcasts with Nick in the past, talking about the work we do at the Bucket List Company and what you guys can do at the Altitude Centre. So we're not going to go over that today. And for the past few weeks, we've done quite a lot of conversations around soft adventure and getting into the outdoors and how do people start and all of those sorts of topics. But we're going to mix that up a little bit today. And I'm going to be chatting with Nick about this year's kind of big mountain season. So obviously we've just, a couple of months ago, the Everest season was in full swing. And people, we all love going to the mountains. We all love climbing, Kilimanjaro and going to Everest Base Camp. But people dream of these bigger things. And we thought we'd have a little bit of a conversation around that today. So, Nick, how many climbers did you have out in the big mountains this year that you would work with?
So this year so far, because obviously for those that don't know, there are 3 periods of the year you climb big mountains. To define a big mountain, we're talking kind of 8,000 meters plus here. So in the first kind of part of the season, which is the Nepalese part of the season, so April, May sort of time, we had 35 summits across Everest, Lhotse, Makalu, and Aconcagua. So across those 4 climbs, we had about 35 summits we had. Then we've got quite a few out in Pakistan at the moment. So K2, G1, G2, Broad Peak, Nanga Parbat, which is speaking as we record this, like they are summiting. And G1 was summited yesterday for the first time of the season, so that's kicked off. And then we've got 19 confirmed attempts on Island Manaslu or Choyu, which is now September, October sort of time. So hopefully we'll break 58,000 meter summits for the year, which will be a new record for us, which will be nice.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you mentioned Broad Peak yesterday because our K2 group going to base camp, they reached base camp today. So we've had a message from the sat phone this morning to say that they reached base camp. So that's super cool as well. So preparation wise then, Nick, like what are these guys coming to you for? Because obviously, we're talking a different kettle of fish now, going from a Kilimanjaro and even an Aconcagua and taking that next step up. Like, what are people coming to you for? Yeah,
so for these big mountains, we work completely worldwide. So we've had a client on every single continent minus Antarctica over the last 2 years. So it's a much more international reach that we do. And when it comes to kind of preparing for these big mountains, we cover every single basis that an athlete will need. For some athletes, that is just being at a point of calling someone to answer questions. For other, it is providing the full training program. So that's the exercise, the nutrition, the pre-acclimatization, because obviously something we'll touch on later is the types of Everest bands that people did in the 2025 season, because it was different, should we say that? And then also going further to we fly equipment all over the world. Clients come to see us, so it's a much more international breadth to what we do. I think the best way to describe it is it's whatever needs doing, because with the sort of expeditions we're talking about here, running to the 5, if not 6 figures. So the type of preparation and the level of preparation is 2, 3, 4 times what you see for Kili, or probably even 2 or 3 times what you see for an Aconcagua.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, we always, advise people to come on to our calls with you. We always advise people to come in and do the, have the testing with you to see how they're going to be, and kind of our argument and pros for that are the fact that, you're spending £3,000-4,000 to go and climb Kilimanjaro. So why would you not go and see how your body reacts before you get there? And like you say, these people that have just been climbing Everest are spending 80, 100, 120,000 pounds for their trip. So, and I know, but I know there's the weather window. It's there's that whole thing of we might not get a window to summit Everest, but but people still need to be prepared, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It's just understanding the challenge, and particularly for those, as there's two types of climbers we see: standard ascent and rapid ascent. In regards to which one you're on, it's just about getting to base camp and standing at the bottom of Everest before the Khumbu and going, "I've done everything I know I can do to give myself the best shot." You're always going to get a weather window. Some years it is very, very short. So when that window comes, you have to be up, ready, and you have to be able to move and move hard. And yeah, you're exactly right. Like, it's not uncommon for clients to fly in from continental Europe or even further afield to come and see us for exactly that reason. If you're spending £4 or £5 grand on a kiddie trip, you're spending 20 times that on your Everest expedition. Like, the expenditure in terms of the preparation goes through the roof as well. A down jacket for kiddie will cost you, 200-300 quid maybe for a good one? Around that sort of month, maybe a little bit more. Your Everest down suit's probably closer to £2 grand. Your boots for kiddie will be, £200-300 for a good pair. Your expedition boots for Everest will be £1,500. So everything is just done on a whole new level. That's because it's the most extreme environment in the world. There's nowhere else on earth apart from other 8,000ers where you hit that level of altitude, that level of cold, but also that level of just, I guess the best way to describe it is just nothingness. You are by yourself. There is no evacuation. There is no rescue. It's me, myself, and I. And, you have to be prepared to potentially give everything to stand on top of the world. There is that unwritten rule that when you go 8,000 meters plus, like, help and support isn't always there, because somebody else is going to have to risk their life to come and help you if you need it. Now, every year there are remarkable stories of rescues and help and kind of human decency, but sadly every year people don't always get the help they need, and things don't always end as everyone would like them to end.
Yeah, it's funny because the number of times I've obviously talked to lots of people who love being in the mountains and all of those things. And, I've walked up to Everest Base Camp with groups before, and they, how much does it cost to climb Everest? And you sort of give them the total, and they just like, hang on a minute, it's there. Like, why? Like, I'm almost here. Why is it now 20 times more expensive? And
more than 20 times the risk.
Well, yeah, but also as well, it's we're talking permit fees, aren't we?
It's $15,000 this year alone, just your permit fee. Permit fee. Yeah.
And obviously, governments are realizing their resources and how they can.
And every year the permit goes up, and every year more people pay it. At the end of the day, mountains are a business for Nepal. I don't know the exact number, but it makes up a pretty large chunk of their GDP. And there is the argument, the more you charge, the more you deal with the overcrowding. You make it even more exclusive by only those who can really, really afford it can go. Pakistan done exactly the same thing with K2 this year. Permits have gone through the roof. Tibet are going to follow very, very similar next year. And there's talks about the Everest permit going up again in 2026. And it will just keep rising. People will just keep paying it. And at the end of the day, the money ends up in the country with the people who work on the mountain.
But don't you think, though, that it is making, we're digressing now from the actual topic, but don't you think that makes mountains become an elitist thing for money rather than, like you say, there are more and more people who can afford to pay it, but but those people might not necessarily, they are going to be the risks on the mountain.
Yeah. And that's always been the case, though. You look at Mallory, you look at, the the history of mountaineering in the 20s, 30s, the 40s, there were people that were working in factories. You know, these are people who came from money. They came from families that were incredibly well off. And high altitude mountaineering has always been and will always be a very, very expensive sport. Like even Kili, which is not high altitude mountaineering, is an incredibly expensive holiday. Like it's the level of risk. And, you know, at the end of the day, could you argue that permits should come down and you pay your Sherpa more? Probably yes. Like maybe that's the way that it should be done, because at the end of the day, he's the one that's risking his life, or she's the one this year risking his life or her life with you. You know, that's the potential argument. And yes, you know, I do think that in years to come, there is going to be an issue of kind of pay to climb, where people who've turned up, who've got very, very little preparation and paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to go, will potentially put people in a dangerous situation. But that's where the government are trying to put in these rules around, you know, you have to climb a 7,000, you have to climb a 6,000 before you get your permit. Like, they are trying to stop that happening. But at the end of the day, you know, as a trip operator, if somebody waves 200 grand in front of your face and goes, will you take me? It's a very, very hard thing to say no to, particularly if you come from Nepal where money isn't as easily accessible as it is for potentially Western companies.
Yeah, no, completely. And, you know, permit fees are, you know, it's people always say to us, you know, well, why is Kilimanjaro more expensive than Everest Base Camp? It's a shorter trip. Well, it's down to the Tanzanian government citing the permit fees. Actually, your trekking fees to go and do Everest Base Camp are relatively, you know, they're kind of $70, you know, for the 2 permits you need. That's it to go up to base camp. Whereas Kilimanjaro is a set amount per day. You know, the government.
Yeah, it's a business. It's a business. You know, you could argue like we in London we've got ULEZ, we've got congestion charge. We tax people to drive into London. They tax you to climb Kili. And you know what? They've got it. People do it, and it's a revenue source. And at the end of the day, you know, that money's got to come from somewhere to support education, to support health, to support social economics within the countries. And, you know, if you've got this mountain that people want to climb, tax it, you know, and if you don't want to climb it, go somewhere else. And so far people haven't, which is again digressing, but it's more economical, but it's a revenue stream at the end of the day. And Everest is the biggest of all of them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it was, you know, a couple of years ago where after they had the traffic jam, you know, the major traffic jam on the mountain, and they said they were putting the fees up. You know, I don't think it was, because like you say, it still happens again and again. You get that one weather window on Everest, and, you know, you've got all those people who are like, I've paid £120,000, £100,000 to be here. This is my one chance. I'm going to stand there.
Yeah, exactly. And what were there this year? There were 850 summits on Everest this year, something like that. 750 from the south side, so from Nepal, 100 from the north side, from Tibet. But there was also, of those 850, or those 750 on the south side, or around that sort of number, there was only 272 foreign clients. 272 foreign clients out of 750. It's like ish. Like, do the maths on that. It's like that is 272 foreign, so Westerners or non-Nepalese, and 434 Sherpa summits. It's like 1 to 1.6. Like, okay, you've got traffic jams, but a lot of those are coming from companies sending climbers up with 2 Sherpas. You know, some companies send clients up with 3 Sherpas. And the weather windows this year weren't horrendous. Like, they weren't great, and there was some interesting practices done on Everest this year. But there was a weather window 13th and 14th of May, where quite a few summits took place. The biggest weather window was the 18th and the 19th of May, where there was over 700 summits on those 2 days alone. Like, that was the weather window this year. It was quite early. Like, typically, we've seen that mid to late May or late May. This year it came quite early, and that caught a couple of teams out, a couple of teams who weren't quite ready. And they had to then go in the later window, which was like 21st, 22nd, 23rd. But that was cold. Like, that was a cold weather window. And there were a few reports of frost-related injuries occurring within that window. And that was because the jet stream did some weird things over Everest this year. It was kind of fluctuating from 35,000 feet down to like 28,000 feet. Everest is 29,000 feet for the other day, 29,32. So there were some occasions of people being up on summit ridges and suddenly 30, 40, 50 mile an hour winds coming in. that drives the temperature down -50, -55, -60. Like that's full frostbite territory. And there were a few reported incidents, unconfirmed, but reported incidents of frost-related injuries from frostbite or frostnip this year, which isn't the most common in Everest. But it was because A, there is that summit pressure on teams. I paid $100,000, I want my shot. And B, because that weather window was quite early this year, or earlier than it has been, it did catch people out in terms of preparation. Because if your team's only arrived at base camp early May, like 5th, 6th of May, they're not actually ready to go. But they haven't done their rotations, they haven't done their prep. You haven't got your kit to camp 3, camp 4 as an operator. So there was a little bit of that this year. It was good that it was more spread out, so it wasn't as bad. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't like a walk in the park and like easy peasy, but the queues weren't as bad. But yeah, it's obviously showed what the windows look like this year and that sort of thing.
Just explain to those listening that maybe don't really understand high altitude mountaineering and weather windows. Like, people might just think the weather window is when you've got clear blue skies, but that's not the case on Everest, is it?
No. So you can only climb Everest basically in May because of weather windows. Before that, it's too cold. After that, it's monsoon season. So you basically confined to May anyway. And because of the height and because of the type of climate Everest is, and this is only 8,000, and to be able to even come down, look at the trip you guys on, Aconcagua has weather windows. Like, there are times you go to Aconcagua, you cannot climb. And it's normally driven by the wind and the rain or snow. Like, when the wind picks up, you can't be on exposed ridges. Like, we've all been walking in the UK when the wind comes across. Like, imagine being on a knife edge at 28,000 feet and that comes across. But the biggest one is the cold. Like, you've got to think, like, you are talking commercial airliner heights here. Like, that's how high you are. But when the wind picks up, the temperature can drop from -20, -30 down to -40, 50, 60, 70. Like, that's unclimbable. Like, that's frostbite territory. You are risking dying of exposure before you even look at the safety side of things in terms of like trying to climb the ropes in those sort of conditions. And the wind does come from anywhere. Like, for anyone who's seen the movie on Netflix, Everest, like, that explains it. It's suddenly, it's okay, it's not okay. Like, we've all been in the Lake District where it's gone from beautiful sunshine to tipping it down and rain in half an hour. Like, the higher you go, the more extreme those transitions are. And, that lovely picture behind you, beautiful blue skies and everything like that. Like, that's a once in a generation sort of day. Like, you do get perfect days, and this year there were some days that were close to perfect, and it was spectacular. But sometimes operators have tolerances. It depends. Different operators have different tolerances, but it's normally somewhere around the 30-mile-an-hour wind window. Anything more than that, they won't climb. Anything below that, they will climb. Depending on your group. If you've got a really strong group, you might have a bit more flexibility in that. But essentially, it all comes down to safety. And it all comes down to that exposure and that risk of falling, basically.
And, just to, explain to people as well, like Nick was just saying, you are in the jet stream, you are at the same height that commercial airlines are flying at. And if you think about, when you've arrived on your holiday half an hour early, because the captain's come on the radio and said, we've had a tailwind pushing us and it's helped us, save a load of time. Yeah. Those winds are going rapid to help, a commercial aeroplane. And that's kind of what people need to contend with, is making sure that those jet streams are a lot higher than 29,000 feet where you're at.
Yeah, exactly. And so next time anybody flies on an airline, they do a long flight, and you've got the nice TV screens in front of you, just click it and just have a look at the outside temperature. That'll show you how cold it is at that sort of height, because you will be absolutely amazed. Absolutely amazed.
And, we've seen a big change over the last few years in terms of rapid ascents of big mountains. Yeah. Before we go into the rapid ascent, just for everybody else that's listening that maybe doesn't really understand high altitude mountaineering and is interested, like, just explain the process of Everest. Like, it's not like Kilimanjaro where you just walk to the top, turn around and come back down.
So
there is a process to this.
there is. And the standard Everest descent is typically 50 to 60 days. That is the length of your trip. And people go, oh, why is it so expensive? Well, that's reason number one. Like, it's a big trip. You try and feed someone for 60 days, it's a lot of food. Remember, somebody's got to carry it up. So how a typical Everest descent, a typical Everest trip will run is, it starts off exactly the same as your Everest Base Camp trip. You walk up to Everest Base Camp. You then probably spend 25 to 35 days at base camp, just sitting around, not doing a lot. You might do a couple of treks here, you might go and climb the odd mountain here or there, but essentially you are living at 2,300 meters, and that's all about your acclimatization. Once you get to the end of that window, and
Nick meant to say 5,300 meters then.
What did I say? Apologies.
2,300 meters.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, 5,300 meters is where people are living. From there, you then start to manage your rotations. So rotations is where you go high, you come back down. So you'll go up to camp 1, you'll come back down. You'll go up to camp 1, up to camp 2, maybe even up to camp 3, come back down to camp 1, have a rest. Go back up to camp 2, maybe, come back down to camp 1, back down to base camp. Right, you're now ready. You know, you've gone up to 7,000 meters on your rotation, and you've got some of the acclimatization from there. You then come back down to base camp, and we wait. And we're waiting for that weather window. We're waiting for the meteorologist to say, right, this is where we go. And then from there, you'll go base camp, camp 1, camp 2, camp 3 on oxygen, camp 4 at the South Pole, summit, camp 4, potentially even straight down to camp 3, camp 1 off the mountain, and then walk back down. So you're talking, it's a very, very long trip, and you're going up, you're coming down, you're going up, you're coming down. And it is just about giving the body time, and it is time to get used to the altitude, to grow those red blood cells, to make those adaptations to hypoxia that you need to get yourself high enough that then you go on oxygen to then continue to climb after that.
And obviously there are people who, summit 8,000 meter peaks without oxygen.
We've got one on K2 at the moment, and it is an unbelievable challenge, an unbelievably tough thing to do. Yeah.
And just explain when, because a lot of people hear the phrase the death zone. Yeah. Just explain what the death zone is to people.
Yeah, so death zone is anything 8,000 meters plus. And it's basically the point where your body is breaking down at such a rate that you are essentially dying as you're wounded. It is as simple as that. Like, the human body cannot survive there for a significant period of time at all. And it is the point where the majority of people sadly lose their lives, where sadly rescue is incredibly hard because you cannot get helicopter rescue that high. You are purely reliant on something literally carrying you down the mountain at that point. And if anybody wants to see what that looks like, there's a fantastic photo of a guy called Gelji Sherpa doing that back in 2023, 2024. Made international news, fantastic photo. That shows you the extremes of what an 8,000 meter rescue looks like. They are incredibly rare. But it does just come down to energy consumption. I think latest estimates are some push for a non-O2 climate is about 20,000 calories a day. 20,000 calories a day. On top of everything you've already built to get yourself up there, like, you cannot eat that much. You are catabolizing fat, muscle, carb, anything your body can use to break down its fuel. It's basically eating itself alive just to try and survive long enough to basically get you down. Obviously, you're trying to go up and come back down. But yeah, it's a place where the human body is not meant to be.
And in terms of, obviously, at sea level, our body is 100% there or thereabouts oxygen. Yeah. Like, what are the differences on the way up in terms of percentages of the amount of oxygen there for us to have?
Yeah. So oxygen at sea level is 20.9 or 20.93%. So we'll call it 21% to make easy maths for me. Namche Bazaar, it's about 3,500 meters, depending on where you are within the village, something like that. That's about 13.2, 13.3% oxygen. So that's Namche. Everest Base Camp, 5,300 meters. That's about 10.8%. That is your standard sort of protocol for an Everest Base Camp. Camp 1 on Everest is, I think, about 6,000 meters, give or take a little bit. That is going to be about 9.7 9.7% oxygen. So just below what you see on Kili. Kili's about 9.8, 9.9. You then get to Camp 3 on Everest, which is about 7,000 meters, which is there, and that's about, trying to run the maths in my head now, it's about 8 and a bit % oxygen, I think. That's where you go on O2. Top of Everest is 6.6% oxygen. So you see basically a 66% drop in the amount of available oxygen to a climber, from 21% when you take off at Heathrow to the top of Everest, which is 6.6%. And that's why we use oxygen, to try and compensate for that 66% drop in available O2. Like, the oxygen's still there, it's just more spread out, but your body sees it as about 6.6%, which is not a lot.
And how much, and just in terms of, again, if we're talking about, this trip is £100,000 for people, how much oxygen are people going to be going through whilst they're on the mountain? Just to give people an idea of how much stuff actually needs to be carried up.
Depending on how fast you're climbing, so speed ascents tend to use a little bit more. Most teams take somewhere between 4 and 7 bottles per person. That's roughly how much you're using. You'll use that from Camp 3 upwards. So from Camp 3 up the Lhotse Lake face to Camp 4, you'll sleep on oxygen. It's a lower flow rate, but you'll sleep on oxygen at the South Col. You'll then climb to the summit on oxygen, climb back down on oxygen, potentially sleep on oxygen again, go back down to Camp 3 on oxygen, and then you'll come off it and go back down there. So the bottles get used up very, very quickly. Most climbers will climb on somewhere between 2 to 4 litres per minute. That's the flow rate. And they'll sleep on 1 to 1.5 litres per minute. And also, if things go wrong, some clients will be on oxygen at Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3. If they're suffering from altitude sickness, they will give clients oxygen to sleep on, to either help them recover so they can keep climbing, or to safely bring them off the mountain again. So oxygen is also used as a safety measure as well as a climbing tool.
Yeah. So as you can see, there is a lot that goes into this. If you've been to Everest Base Camp in that season, in the April, May season, well, yeah, it's a giant city. And if you can see the logistics that go into it, and, like you say, you've got doctors up there, you've got hospitals up there, you've got meteorologists up there, you've got
anything you could need is at Everest Base Camp. Like in recent years, there's been pizza ovens, there's been ping pong, there's been saunas, and okay, you talk about the ethics of that, but everything you need is at Everest Base Camp. Everything you need is there, and as soon as you leave it deteriorates. The quality deteriorates very, very quickly. To sitting in a tent at -30 on the South Col, on oxygen, freezing, waiting in a bottle, it very, very quickly becomes unglamorous. And anybody who says that Everest is easy, you can pay to climb Everest, I would implore them to spend just one night at Camp 3. Just spend one night at Camp 3. And everybody who summits Everest has undergone a huge amount of suffering to do it. Yes, base camp's lovely. Yes, the trekking is lovely. But that's nowhere near the level of suffering. Like, you can have a lovely experience and then suddenly, it gets real. And everybody who summits Everest deserves to summit Everest, because A, they've done the work beforehand, but B, they have basically survived those high altitudes and the experience and the deprivation that causes.
So obviously, there is 50, 60 days, for a lot of people, they haven't got the ability to have that much time off work. But, we've seen a rapid rise over the last few years into, rapid mountaineering.
Yeah, and it took it to whole new levels. This year took it to whole new levels. An old rapid ascent used to be 21 days. 21 days used to be your standard flash ascent. And what a 21-day expedition would involve would be 8 to 12 weeks of pre-acclimatization, so sleeping in a hypoxic tent at home, getting to Heathrow, flying to Kathmandu, and then helicoptering from Kathmandu via the to Everest Base Camp. So you miss out that trek part, and you also miss out the 25 to 35 days that people sit around. You do all of that at home. You land at Everest Base Camp, you then start your rotations, so those rotations I spoke about, and then summit and come back down. Normally, they are 17 to 21 days, and that was and still is class of a rapid ascent. You can do 30 or 40-day ascents as well. So it doesn't have to be quite that aggressive. 40, 13, 21 days was your old window. This year, teams pushed it. Like, there was Mission Everest, also known as the X-Men, which we did a huge amount of work on, and we were really, really lucky to be part of. They did Heathrow to Heathrow in 6.5 days. A group of ex-British Special Forces. And if anybody wants to read the story, have a look. They're trying to raise £1 million for veterans charities, so they did it for a good cause. But have a look at it. Unbelievable story. London to London in 6.5 days, with an Everest summit within it. I should caveat. And then that went even further. There was a US guy this year based out of New York. I think did London to Dubai in like 3.5 days. Unbelievably fast summit. So when I say London to Dubai, that is flying from New York to Kathmandu, getting to base camp, touching the top, coming back down and flying back to Dubai. Logistically, I don't know how you do that. Never mind physically, but it shows how well this pre-acclimatization can work. How well the equipment we have now. And that's exactly the same equipment we use for base camp. Exactly the same equipment we use for Kili, for Aconcagua, for a lot longer periods of time, but exactly the same equipment. It shows how well the science works, but it also shows human endeavor. How fast can we do this? How quick can I do sea level to sea level? There were 2 guys this year, I think Tyler and can't remember the second guy's name. Give me a second. Tyler and Carl, who tried speed ascents. What a typical speed ascent, so not flash ascent, but speed ascent is that I think they defined this one as base camp to summit. So how quickly can I go from base camp to the top? The current record, if anyone was wondering, 20 hours, 24 minutes back in 1998. Somebody climbed Everest, non-O2, in 20 hours and 24 minutes from top to bottom. And that's ludicrously fast. Okay, they acclimatized fully and did everything, but did top to bottom in just over 20 hours. Carl had 1 attempt and turned back at Camp 3 due to the wind. And Tyler had 3 attempts and got to 17,500 feet before altitude and hallucinations turned him back. So that's pretty extraordinary. Climbing that fast and trying to climb Everest in less than 20 hours is unbelievable. So yeah, it was an interesting year. You had the flash ascent, which is like home to home, and they range from kind of 3 days, 6 days to kind of 21 days on both the north and the south side. The north side had flash ascents this year as well. So don't ever forget about that, because you can climb Everest from 2 sides. And then also you had the other notable summit this year was Cami. So Cami summited, hit for the 31st time, because why not? And Tashi. So Tashi summited Everest 4 times in 15 days. Once with the rope team, and then 3 different times with different clients. Like, some people climb it once in their life. He climbed it 4 times in less than 2 weeks in a day. So yeah, there were some extraordinary things done on the mountain this year, ranging from flash to speed to notable summits as well.
So the guy that went and did it in 3 days, did he go from base camp then?
That was from New York.
No, but did he start at base camp?
Yes.
Or did he?
Yeah. So for it to be an Everest summit, you have to do base camp to summit and back to base camp. And then there are helicopters either side. The logistics have to be to go that fast, even though the logistics have to be spot on. And yeah, it's then just a case of getting your athlete to move that fast. I don't know what the exact itinerary for the team was, or for him, but unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. You basically just don't stop. You just climb continuously to the top in one push, come back down in one push with maybe a few power naps and some kind of 1-2 hour kind of breaks there. But it is nearly a continuous movement, because when you factor the flights in, you basically got 2 to 4 days to get this done, to actually climb. Like, you can't stop. You don't have time to stop. You've got to be up and back down. And the other thing, I think those 2 ascents, the 6 day and the 3 or 4 day ascent, is you've got to time it with the weather window. So I know with this British team, they were basically just on guard, on just waiting. It's like, okay, right, the meteorologist says this is the weather window, book your flight. It would go to that extreme, because you can't get there and wait for 3 days for the weather, because you're not going to hit your time zones. It is a case of like, right, weather's going to be the 18th of May, 19th of May, book your flight for the 17th. land in Kathmandu on this type of helicopter, will get you to base camp for late on the 17th. We'll push all the way through the night of the 17th to be really high on the 18th. So when that weather window comes, you're good to go. Just the logistical feat is unbelievable, and the support around those clients and the two operators that did it were absolutely fantastic. That's before you even get to the work that the climbers have done beforehand, the hours and hours of training, the hundreds of hours of pre-acclimatization. And I think that's the key. Like, you still have to acclimatize for these trips. You can't just magically deal with altitude really well. But you do those hundreds, if not thousands of hours of acclimatization you would have done in Nepal, in London, in New York, in Manchester, wherever home is. Like, you don't skip that time. You just do it in a different place. And that's what the key to these sort of clients is that you don't cut corners, you just do it in a different place. So life isn't as affected as it otherwise would be with those more traditional ascents.
I think it'd be interesting to kind of think what the listeners are thinking at that point from an ethical mountaineering perspective.
Yeah, that's always been the argument with rapid ascents, is the ethics of it. You know, how much is summit tapping? How much are you standing on the top? And how much is climbing for the love of climbing? And at the end of the day, the only person who really knows that is the client. And yeah, there's always going to be ethical concerns and there's always going to be ethical questions. But at the end of the day, like, every mountain has ethical questions. Like, you can go as deep as going like, okay, should every Everest climb be unsupported? Like, why should Sherpas be risking their life to climb with you? You know, all of this sort of stuff. And it's a really difficult one because every client has the right to do it. Every operator has the right to run it. Yeah, there probably is a sweet spot, but at the end of the day, like, people are going to do it. And, you know, the ethics is always the biggest concern. And the only person who has to be happy with the ethics at the end of the day is the client who's doing it. You know, at the end of the day, if they're happy with how the op is run, they're happy with how it's run, they're happy with the ethics, then, and the operator is, and the government are, and everything like that, then yeah, 100% crack on. And, you know, at the end of the day, our job as listeners, as viewers, isn't to judge those ethics. My job is somebody will come to me and say, I'm doing this, get me ready. Like, that is my job. And whether I think it's too fast or not fast enough. And to be honest, none of the clients this year have reached that, in my opinion. Like, this year have particularly been of how fast can we do it? Like, this is very much about, like, what is the human limit? How hard can the human body be pushed? Like, where is breaking point? You know, we love as sports scientists trying to find where the human body breaks. We love it. Like, we did it with the sub 2 hour marathon. Like, is it possible? You know, we did it with the sub 1000 meters years ago. Is it possible? The sub 4 mile, it can never be done. 10 years ago, Everest could never be climbed in a week. Turns out again. Like, humans are fantastic at trying to find the limits and trying to push themselves to that point. And this year summarised that, in my opinion.
So the team of special services you had then, just describe what their preparation was with you before going.
Yes, actually very, very similar to what we do for someone climbing Everest Base Camp or climbing Kilimanjaro or climbing Aconcagua, just bigger. So we started with testing. And not the same testing that we do in the bucket list, kind of the highest tier of testing we do that covers basically everything from altitude to VO2 max testing to everything. So we started with that. We then did, I think, a 12 to 16 week block, depending on the climate, depending on what they needed. We're then testing it halfway and testing at the end. We don't normally do that for base camp or Aconcagua or Kilimanjaro because we just don't need to. But with these boys, we needed markers. We needed to see how they were progressing. We needed to make changes. And what that training looked like was a combination of sleeping in a tent. Any rapid ascent, you have to sleep in a tent, combined with IHE, which is passive exposure, and IHT, which is active exposure. Those last two methods are exactly the same training types we use for bucket list trips. Okay, bucket list trips, we might do somewhere between 5 and 20 hours. These boys, we were looking at well north of 100, 200, 300 hours. So the volume was a lot larger. The methodology was the same. And what we were looking to do there was dual fold. It was number one, it was grow more red blood cells. That's what sleeping at altitude does, like increase the number you've got. And then part two, through IHE and IHT, was increase the amount of oxygen bound to each one. So if you've got more red blood cells and each one is carrying more oxygen, you've then got a greater oxygen carrying capacity in the body, and can push harder for longer and deal with the altitude better. I should say both those climbs obviously were on oxygen as well. Like both of those, that week-long, any rapid ascent always uses oxygen. There's not been, to my knowledge, a non-O2 flash ascent to date. And again, that might be where the future goes. Is that possible? Last year I said no. This year proved to me that maybe it could be. Maybe it could be if you get the prep right and you get the right athlete and you get everything done properly. Maybe somebody can climb non-O2 flash. We shall see.
Yeah, and when they're sleeping in the tent, then in their house, like what percentage of oxygen are they having on a nightly basis in the tent?
It depends. So we do it gradually. So the same way that you do it in the real mountain, we do that. Like when you're on Everest Base Camp, you don't just go to Everest Base Camp. You just start sleeping at Kilimanjaro 5,100 meters, but you feel awful. We do the same with the tent. We build people up to 2,000, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, all the way up to 5,000 meters. We then go 5.5, 6. We can even sleep up to 6,500 meters. So we can fully acclimatize people now to basically Camp 2 on Everest, over the top of Kili, basically the top of Aconcagua. We will go all the way up there and very, very slowly building them up. What that rate looks like very much depends on the athlete. It depends on how they're coping. You know, if they're coping with it really well, we'll build the altitude faster. If they're struggling, they're traveling with work, they've got this, that, or the other one, we'll be a little bit slower. But because we're at home and it's all done by a generator, it gives us that controllability. You know, we will have athletes sleeping at 6,000 meters one night, 3,000 meters the next night, 5,000 meters the night after that, because you just match it to what the athlete needs and what suits them at that time in their training block. And it's what makes the equipment really useful. Is you can't do that on the real mountain. You can't bounce around that much. But with equipment, you can, and it just means that every single night is as good as it should be, and every single night gives the maximum acclimatization benefit it can give, whilst also having an eye on recovery and the physical load that the training puts into them, so they can recover from that training and make sure they don't get injured or overtrain or fatigue and stuff like that creeps in.
And in terms of, have you got data on the success rates on people who have gone through? So this is for high altitude now.
Yeah, so we had, I don't know what the success rates in Everest were last year. We had 28 of 33 this year on Everest. 28 of 34 we had this year on Everest, which I will take. It's higher than the mountain average. Everest is typically somewhere between 50 and 70% every year, depending on the year, depending on the environment. And you can run the maths on that yourself. We were 28 of 34 and significantly higher than mountain average. It's the same with Kili, same with Aconcagua, same with Base Camp. We normally sit somewhere between 5 and 20% higher than mountain average, those who pre-acclimatise. Obviously, for some mountains, you can't go 20% more because more than 80% of people summit anyway. But if people didn't need the proof that it works, like big mountains are the best proof that this stuff works. Like if it works for Everest, it certainly works for Kili. And okay, you don't need to do much. It doesn't have to be as extreme. You don't have to look at sleep tents and all of that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, those who deal with altitude better are at lower risk of altitude sickness and have a much better and more enjoyable trip. And I think particularly for a lot of the climbs that the bucket list do, that second part is just as important as that first part. Like you've got to have fun and enjoy what you do.
And in terms of, obviously, you know, people can hire the kit off you and do it at home if people don't live in London. Like, what's the cost difference of then having the tent to having the machine and all of those sorts of things?
Yes, the tent doesn't add a lot on, to be honest. The tent's only actually like 40 or 50 quid a month, depending on what size you need. Like, they're not the expensive parts. And, you know, the at-home options for anybody not in London is the easiest way to do it, because London, for some people, isn't the easiest place to get to. And if you can have the altitude, like the altitude comes to you rather than you come to the altitude. So like a sleep system's like 550 quid, 600, about 550 quid for the month. So yeah, it's not a small investment, but suddenly, you know, you and your half a climbing Everest Base Camp, you know, probably a £6,000-7,000 trip when you factor in flights, like trip costs, kit and everything like that. 500 quid within £7,000, you know, it's less than 10%, but it makes a massive difference. Like, that's where the value of it comes from. And as I said, it's not always about making it. Like, that is non-negotiable in our opinion. It's also having a good trip and enjoying it as well, because that's a massive part of it. I think, you know, you've definitely had clients, and I know we have, who have got up there there. And okay, they got up there, but they maybe haven't had the most enjoyable experience on the way up there. Like these trips are supposed to be a trip of a lifetime and B, some sort of a holiday. Like you're supposed to enjoy it and always think back. And like we're both lucky enough to have stood on top of big mountains. Like I can close my eyes and still see the top of Kili. Like watch the sunrise over the Serengeti and had a fantastic trip. Like we were lucky enough to climb with you guys for 2 car. We watched the sunrise over the Atlas Mountains, and I'll never forget that. I was lucky enough that I didn't have any issues in it. For me, it's just a fantastic memory. For others, that memory involves migraines, vomiting, all of the horrible stuff that doesn't stop you summiting, but maybe just puts a bit of a dampener on it.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're head down struggling and not looking around and seeing the views and chatting with the peers that you're on the trip with, it's not an enjoyable experience, is it?
You've missed some of the magic of climbing.
Yeah. And I think, that's kind of, for me, the ethical part of a rapid ascent is you're not enjoying that. You're not enjoying the view.
Yeah, that is the biggest argument. Like you're in the mountains to climb, not to enjoy being in the mountains.
Yeah. But, like you say, people always want first, don't they? They always want to be the quickest. Like,
if you wanted to go and climb Everest, could you potentially take 60 days off work, leave the bucket list for 60 days? That might be a very hard thing to do. Could you potentially take 3 weeks off work and have a team manage themselves for 3 weeks and you get to do your dream? You might be able to make that work. And that's the counter argument to it. And you're always going to have that conversation. You're always going to have people who follow the traditional view, people who climb splash, and then who climb very fast. And there's always pros and cons to everything. And at the end of the day, that all three will always be done because there's money to be made in Everest. Everest is a business at the end of the day, is a commercial entity. And, there is always that client first approach. And my job in particular is no matter what trip somebody is doing is to get them ready. So first and foremost, they come home. That is the first goal in Everest. This is you come home. And secondly, is you get to touch the top of the world and you join that very elusive club of less than 8,000 people who have actually done it.
Yeah, and I think that's, there are companies out there who only do Everest. Like that is their...
They do 8,000 and they only do 8,000 and they absolutely specialise in it. Yeah.
And, they're making good money out of, a very short season a year in essence. And that is what they do. So, there are always plenty of people. I mean, we all saw the pictures a few years ago of the queue. You know how many people were on the mountain. So
yeah. And it's about managing that and making everything as well as it could be, and just trying to make sure that everybody stays safe, everybody gives themselves the best chance. And overcrowding is always going to be an issue. And we spoke about permit fees at the beginning, and that's how the Nepalese sees the best way to control that is charge people even more money. So let people go. How do you stop that many people climbing? It's a hard thing to do.
Well, I mean, I think that's it, isn't it? It's, at the end of the day, we've got there is over tourism everywhere in the world. If you go to the Taj Mahal, if you go to Angkor Wat, you
go to walk across the London Bridge on the way home, Tower Bridge on the way home from work. You see people queuing out the door there for hours and hours to look at Tower of London, to look at Tower Bridge. Over tourism is everywhere. Tourism is a big business.
Yeah, exactly that. Perfect. Well, Nick, thanks ever so much for coming on and chatting with us today. Obviously, it's not one of our normal topics, but people aspire to climb big mountains. Yeah. And, even if you've done Aconcagua, the next step for you might be a 7,000 meter mountain, or you might have your eyes set on an 8,000. And, if you have, it's certainly worth having a chat with Nick.
If anybody does have aspirations, please reach out. This is probably one of the only places in the world where you can have a normal conversation about climbing an 8,000er. And hopefully for everyone who listens to this, who's off to Everest Base Camp in 2025 and 2026, just have a look at the mountain when you're there. Just think about what we spoke about today and the logistics and the size of it. And if anybody is lucky enough to go in April and May with the bucket list and be there for the 2026 season when it is all kicking off, this will resonate even more. When Keith says it's a city that's got everything you need, it really, really is.
Yeah, and that's, we've done podcasts on Everest Base Camp before. And like I've always said, it is possible to climb Everest in the autumn season, but very few people attempt it. If you want to see base camp as a base camp, then you really need to be making sure you're there April, May. Obviously, the beginning of April is as everything starts being carried up. And then, like Nick said, beginning of May, anyone that's doing the long stay, they're pretty much there by the end of April, beginning of May, ready to.
And most rapid ascents will arrive mid-May, early May is when most rapid ascents arrive. And it's the same, K2. K2 summer season is now. So if you want to see K2 base camp, it's not as big or as massive, but that. And if anybody's doing the Annapurna trek, Annapurna base camp is early April, and we want to see Manaslu base camp at its biggest and its best. That's September, October sort of time. Like every 8,000 meters has a base camp, and a lot of the trips that you can do match up with that. So if you do want to see it, and maybe not the size of Everest, have a look at K2, have a look at Annapurna, have a look at Manaslu. They will give you a good understanding of what these base camps are like. Everest is just a step above.
Perfect. Brilliant. Well, Nick, thanks ever so much for coming on. I'm sure we will have you on the podcast again in the coming months.
We undoubtedly will.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Hope you found this episode interesting and informative, because that's what we kind of thought about doing this episode of the podcast, and that's what we decided to do it and why we did it. So, to inform and make you aware of those things. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. But until then, have a great week. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.